For over 2,000 years, China was ruled by emperors. They were the sons of heaven, chosen to govern the Middle Kingdom. They held absolute power over one of the world's greatest civilizations. But in the early 20th century, everything changed. A dynasty that once stood unchallenged for centuries came crashing down. And with it, the fate of its final ruler. A boy emperor who would live a life of unimaginable privilege, betrayal, exile, and tragedy. This is the story of the last emperor of China, Puyi. The Forbidden City was a world unlike any other. Behind its towering red walls and golden gates, emperors ruled in isolation, their words treated as divine law. But when Puyi entered this world, he was just a 2-year-old child, too young to understand the weight of the throne he was about to inherit. In 1908, as the mighty Qing Dynasty faced collapse, Puyi was chosen by the Empress Dowager Cixi to be China's next ruler. His predecessor, the Guangxu Emperor, had mysteriously died. Many believed he was poisoned on Cixi's orders to ensure that her chosen heir would take the throne. Puyi was carried to the dragon throne, dressed in fine silk robes embroidered with golden dragons. He had no idea what was happening. He cried as the grand ceremony took place, as ministers and officials bowed before him, calling him their ruler. But behind the scenes, the real power was in the hands of his regents. The imperial court was already crumbling, and Puyi was nothing more than a symbol of a fading empire. The world outside the Forbidden City was changing rapidly. For centuries, China had been a powerful empire, but by the early 1900s, it was struggling. Foreign powers had carved up parts of the country, rebellions had weakened the Qing rule, and new ideas of democracy and modernization were spreading. In 1911, the inevitable happened. The Xinhai Revolution erupted. The people of China, tired of imperial rule, rose up. Armies turned against the Qing Dynasty, and within months, the empire collapsed. Yet inside the Forbidden City, Puyi was unaware of it all. The palace walls kept him sheltered from the chaos. Then one day his world changed forever. A court official entered, knelt before the young emperor, and presented him with a document. It was an abdication decree. The Qing Dynasty was officially over. Puyi, at the age of 6, was no longer the ruler of China. Even though he had lost his throne, Puyi was allowed to stay in the Forbidden City. The new Republic of China, led by Sun Yat-sen, agreed to let him live there under a special arrangement. To Puyi, life inside the palace continued much as before. He was still surrounded by eunuchs, concubines, and grand ceremonies, but in reality, he was a prisoner in his own home. As Puyi grew older, he became obsessed with his lost throne. He longed to restore the Qing Dynasty and take back the power that had been taken from him. He studied English under a Scottish tutor named Reginald Johnston, who introduced him to Western ideas and a world beyond the Forbidden City. Puyi admired the West's modern advancements, yet he remained trapped in the traditions of his imperial past. By 1924, his illusion of power came crashing down again. General Feng Yuxiang, a warlord in Beijing, overthrew the government and expelled Puyi from the Forbidden City. For the first time in his life, Puyi stepped outside the walls that had sheltered him since childhood. He was no longer an emperor. He was just an ordinary man. Exiled from Beijing, Puyi fled to Tianjin, where he lived under the protection of foreign powers. He took refuge in the Japanese-controlled area of the city, where he was treated like royalty. Japan saw him as a useful tool, a way to control China's future. And Puyi, still dreaming of restoring the Qing Dynasty, willingly played along. Then came the Manchurian Incident of 1931. Japan, seeking to expand its empire, staged an attack and took over Manchuria, renaming it Manchukuo. They needed a figurehead, someone to legitimize their rule. Puyi was the perfect candidate. In 1932, he was declared the ruler of Manchukuo, but this time, he was no emperor, he was a puppet. The Japanese controlled everything. Puyi had no real power. Every decision, every speech, every action was dictated by his Japanese advisors. He signed documents without reading them, carried out orders without question. He was told he was the ruler of a new empire. But in reality, he was nothing more than a pawn in Japan's expansionist plans. As World War II intensified, Manchukuo became a battleground. Puyi was trapped in a war he had no control over. When Japan surrendered in 1945, Soviet forces stormed Manchuria. Puyi tried to flee, attempting to board a plane, but he was captured by the Soviets. The former emperor of China, once ruler of the Forbidden City, was now a prisoner of war. For 5 years, Puyi was held in the Soviet Union. The communists in China, led by Mao Zedong, saw him as a symbol of the past, a relic of feudal rule. In 1950, the Soviets handed Puyi over to the People's Republic of China, and he was sent to a re-education camp. In prison, he was forced to confront the reality of his past. He was no longer addressed as Your Majesty. He was just prisoner number 981. The communists made him write confessions, admit to his mistakes, and learn the values of the new communist state. He spent nearly a decade in captivity, and slowly he was transformed. The once proud emperor, who had lived in palaces and ruled an empire, now worked in prison fields, sweeping floors and tending gardens. After years of re-education, the government deemed him reformed. In 1959, he was released and given a new life. No longer an emperor, no longer a prisoner, he became an ordinary citizen of the People's Republic of China. Puyi tried to adjust to his new life. He worked as a gardener in Beijing, living quietly in a small apartment. He married again, but his new life was simple and unremarkable. The world he once knew, the grandeur of the Qing Dynasty, the Forbidden City, the royal court was gone. He was a relic of the past, living in a world that had moved on without him. In 1967, during the chaos of Mao's Cultural Revolution, Puyi's past once again made him a target. He was harassed, humiliated, and forced to publicly denounce his imperial background. The revolution saw him as a symbol of the old feudal China, and he lived his final years under constant scrutiny. On October 17, 1967, Puyi died of complications from cancer at the age of 61. His death marked the end of an era. The last emperor of China, the ruler who had once sat on the dragon throne, the man who had been at the center of China's greatest upheavals, passed away not in a palace, but in a small Beijing hospital. Studio microphone, from emperor to exile, from prisoner to gardener. Puyi's life was a journey unlike any other. He witnessed the fall of an empire, the rise of communism, and the complete transformation of China. His story is a reminder that even the most powerful rulers can be reduced to nothing, and that history moves forward, with or without them. Subscribe to Empire Storytales for more incredible stories from history.